Could Barcelona's pursuit of Julian Álvarez have just taken a dramatic turn? Because Atlético Madrid have reportedly decided to escalate the situation by filing a complaint with FIFA and the Spanish Football Federation. It's a move that's already sparked huge debate across the football world, with some fans believing Barcelona could face serious consequences, while others see it as nothing more than a negotiating tactic. So what exactly happened? What are Atlético Madrid accusing Barcelona of? And perhaps the biggest question of all, is this complaint actually capable of stopping one of the biggest transfer stories of the summer? Let's break everything down because there's a lot more to this story than the headlines suggest. Welcome back, everyone. If you're following Barcelona's transfer plans this summer, then you've probably seen the reports surrounding Julian Álvarez. Over recent weeks, speculation linking the Argentine striker with Barcelona has continued to grow, especially with the club looking for a long-term successor to Robert Lewandowski. But now, this transfer saga has entered an entirely different phase. Instead of discussing transfer fees, payment structures, or negotiations between clubs, we're now talking about legal complaints, FIFA regulations, and whether Barcelona have acted appropriately during their pursuit of the player. The situation has suddenly become much more complicated. However, before jumping to conclusions, let's start with what is actually being reported. According to the reports, Atlético Madrid believe Barcelona made contact with Julian Álvarez or people representing him, while the striker remains under contract with Atlético. From Atlético's perspective, that's a problem. Professional football has regulations designed to protect clubs from losing contracted players through unauthorized approaches. The entire transfer system depends on clubs respecting existing contracts before formal negotiations begin. That's why Atlético have reportedly decided to submit an official complaint to both FIFA and the Spanish Football Federation. It's an aggressive move, but it's also one that sends a very clear message. They're not prepared to let this transfer develop without challenging Barcelona's conduct if they genuinely believe the rules have been broken. Now, whether those allegations are eventually proven is an entirely different conversation. But simply filing the complaint immediately changes the atmosphere surrounding this transfer saga. One of the biggest questions people are asking is this: why make the complaint now? Why not wait until negotiations become more advanced? I think timing is incredibly important here. From Atlético Madrid's point of view, allowing the transfer story to continue without responding creates a dangerous situation. Every new report linking Álvarez with Barcelona increases public expectation that he'll eventually leave. Every interview, every transfer update, every social media discussion. Slowly, the narrative begins to shift away from Atlético Madrid controlling the future of one of their biggest stars. That's something no club wants, especially when you're talking about one of your most valuable players. By filing a complaint now, Atlético immediately changes the conversation. Instead of everyone discussing when Barcelona will make an offer, people are now discussing whether Barcelona have followed the rules. That alone creates pressure. Let's try to understand this from Atlético Madrid's perspective. Imagine you're one of Europe's biggest clubs. You've invested heavily in a player. He's under a long-term contract. You expect him to remain one of the leaders of your project. Then suddenly another major European club begins attracting constant headlines involving your player. Supporters become nervous. The media asks questions every single day. Rumors continue growing. Whether those rumors are true or not, they slowly become part of the story surrounding your club. Eventually, you reach a point where staying silent may actually make you appear weak. That's why I think this complaint isn't only about legal concerns. It's also about protecting the club's position publicly. Atlético want everyone, including Barcelona, to understand they won't simply accept losing one of their biggest players without defending themselves. And honestly, that's understandable. Every club would want to protect its own interests. Now, let's move away from emotion and focus on the regulations. This is where many of the online discussions become confusing. Some people are acting as though Barcelona have already been found guilty. Others are dismissing the complaint entirely. The reality sits somewhere in the middle. Football's transfer rules are designed to respect contractual stability. If a player remains under contract, clubs are generally expected to deal with the player's current club before holding unauthorized negotiations. The purpose is obvious. Without those protections, contracts would become meaningless. Every transfer window would become complete chaos. So yes, there are regulations covering these situations. But having regulations and proving they've been broken are two completely different things. And that's where this story becomes much more interesting. This is probably the most important part of the entire discussion. A transfer rumor is not evidence. Media reports are not evidence. A player wanting to join another club is not evidence. Even Barcelona preparing financially for a future transfer doesn't automatically prove wrongdoing. If Atlético Madrid want this complaint to result in serious action, they'll likely need something much stronger. Concrete proof. That could mean documented communications, testimony, or other credible evidence showing there were unauthorized negotiations that breached the relevant regulations. Without that, proving misconduct becomes significantly more difficult. That's why it's important not to confuse allegations with established facts. At this stage, a complaint has reportedly been made. That does not automatically mean the accusations have been proven. And until more information emerges, that's an important distinction for everyone to remember. So, where does that leave Barcelona? Should supporters actually be worried? Is this simply another chapter in a complicated transfer negotiation, or could this genuinely create obstacles for the club's plans to sign Julián Álvarez? In Part 2, we'll examine Barcelona's side of the story, discuss whether this complaint is likely to have any real impact, look at similar situations from the past, and explain why the coming days could determine whether this becomes a genuine legal battle or simply another transfer saga filled with pressure and headlines. Now let's turn our attention to Barcelona, because this is where the story becomes much more balanced. When a complaint like this makes headlines, it's easy to assume the club on the receiving end has already done something wrong. But that's not how these situations work. At least based on the information that's currently available, there's been no public evidence showing that Barcelona directly violated FIFA regulations. And that's an important distinction. Being interested in a player isn't against the rules. Scouting a player isn't against the rules. Planning financially for a future transfer isn't against the rules. Even preparing a formal offer isn't a problem, provided the process follows the regulations. That's why Barcelona's position, at least for now, appears relatively straightforward. Unless investigators are presented with convincing evidence that unauthorized negotiations actually took place, this remains an allegation rather than a proven case. Of course, football moves quickly. New information could emerge tomorrow. Someone could produce documents or communications that completely change the discussion. But until that happens, it's difficult to argue that Barcelona are facing an immediate crisis. So let's answer the biggest question. Should Barcelona supporters actually be worried? Personally, I don't think this situation deserves the level of panic that some of the headlines are creating. Could it become serious? Absolutely. If evidence emerged showing deliberate attempts to encourage a player to ignore contractual obligations, FIFA would have every reason to investigate thoroughly. Those regulations exist for a reason. Football depends on contracts being respected, but that's a very different scenario from the one we're looking at today. Right now, we're talking about a complaint, not a verdict, not a punishment, not even a formal conclusion. And those differences matter. Social media often skips straight to the worst possible outcome, but real investigations don't work like that. Authorities examine the available evidence before reaching any conclusions. Until then, everything else remains speculation. There's another angle to this story that I think deserves much more attention. Transfer negotiations are psychological battles just as much as financial ones. Every public statement, every interview, every leak to the media, every official complaint, all of it influences the environment surrounding a deal. Think about what Atlético Madrid have achieved simply by making this complaint. Instead of everyone discussing Barcelona's transfer strategy, the conversation has shifted toward legal questions. Instead of talking only about transfer fees, we're debating regulations. That changes the pressure on everyone involved. Barcelona now know they'll be watched even more closely. The players' representatives know every move will attract scrutiny. Supporters become emotionally invested. From Atletico's perspective, that's not necessarily a bad outcome. Even if the complaint ultimately leads nowhere, it reminds everyone that Atletico intend to defend their position throughout this process. That's smart negotiating. Whether it changes the final outcome remains to be seen, but it certainly changes the conversation. So, where do things go from here? The next phase depends almost entirely on whether new information emerges. If no additional evidence appears, this story may gradually lose momentum while negotiations continue behind the scenes. The focus would then return to the issues that usually decide transfers: the players' wishes, the financial package, and whether the two clubs can eventually reach an agreement. On the other hand, if credible evidence is presented supporting Atletico's allegations, then the situation changes dramatically. At that point, the discussion moves beyond rumors and enters a much more formal process. But today, we simply don't know if that evidence exists. And that's why patience is important. Football fans naturally want immediate answers, but some stories take time to develop. This is almost certainly one of them. Looking at everything we've discussed, here's my view. I think Atletico Madrid genuinely feel frustrated. If they believe another club has approached one of their key players improperly, then filing a complaint is a logical response. Every club has the right to defend what it believes are its interests. At the same time, I also believe it's far too early to assume Barcelona have done anything that would justify serious punishment. Those are two separate ideas, and both can be true. A complaint can be genuine, and the evidence can still fall short. Until we know more, I think it's best to avoid extreme conclusions. This story is significant because of the clubs involved, the player involved, and the potential transfer. But significant doesn't automatically mean catastrophic. For now, I describe this as an important development rather than a decisive one. The transfer saga isn't over. In many ways, it feels like it's only just entering its most interesting phase. So to sum everything up, Atletico Madrid have reportedly taken their concerns to FIFA and the Spanish Football Federation because they believe Barcelona made an improper approach for Julián Álvarez while he remains under contract. The complaint has certainly increased attention on the transfer. However, attention and proof are not the same thing. Unless convincing evidence emerges showing that the regulations were actually breached, it's difficult to see this alone preventing Barcelona from continuing their pursuit of the player. For now, this looks like a story that deserves careful monitoring rather than immediate panic. The next few days, and possibly the next few weeks, could tell us much more about where this transfer is ultimately heading. One thing is certain: this saga is far from over. Now I want to hear from all of you. Do you think Atletico Madrid are simply protecting their interests, or do you believe this complaint could genuinely create problems for Barcelona's pursuit of Julián Álvarez? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, because I'm really interested to see how you view this situation. If you enjoyed today's breakdown, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest Barcelona news, transfer updates, and in-depth analysis. As always, thank you so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.